Pro wrestling history is packed with big names and legendary promotions, but tucked between the giants of the US and Japan was a Central European powerhouse that built its own identity, featuring an eclectic global roster and led by a larger-than-life promoter and star. This is Defunct Championship Wrestling Episode 28, the story of Otto Wanz and the Catch Wrestling Association. To understand the story of the Catch Wrestling Association, you first have to know a little bit about how pro wrestling functioned in Austria and Germany before it. Going back to potentially post-World War II, so 1946 or 47, wrestling in the region fell under the control of the International Professional Wrestling Federation. This in German, or the IBV for short. Under the IBV banner, various promoters, like Nico Selenkowitz for Bremen, Germany and Graz, Austria, would hold consecutive tournaments in their respective towns. So it wasn't week-to-week live events like in the US. It would be a couple weeks of a tournament and then they'd come back in a few months. That's how I understand it, at least. This system would continue right through to the 1960s, when a young Austrian boxer named Otto Wanz would make his pro wrestling debut. There's a lot of dispute over exactly when Otto debuted, but seems like the general consensus is 1968. Otto was 6'3", 350 pounds, strong as an ox. He could rip phone books in half. I love ridiculous feats of strength like that. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Otto's early years in the business. What is known for a fact is that he worked his way up the cards and started getting over and winning these tournaments around 1973. Around the mid-70s, Otto started promoting smaller tournaments in small towns with partner Peter Willem. In August 1977, Otto would travel to South Africa and become the CWA World Champion. The title was the top championship of the fictitious Canadian Wrestling Association. He'd lose the belt to Don Leo Jonathan a month later, before regaining the belt in July of 1978, in front of a hometown crowd in Austria. The victory began a reign that would last over 3,000 days. His popularity in Europe eventually led to a spot with the AWA in 1982. After a brief stint in August of 1982, Otto would win the AWA World title from Nick Bockwinkel. He dropped the belt back to Bockwinkel in October that year before heading back to Europe. The rumor for decades had been that Otto paid for the honor. Otto knew winning a world title in America would make him look good back home, and help with his drawing power. But both Verne and Bockwinkel have denied that cash is why the title was switched. Whether or not that's true, Otto winning the AWA World title did make him an even bigger star in Europe. By the mid-80s, he'd become a megastar in Central Europe. According to Terry Funk, Otto was so over because he knew what he did best. He knew what the fans wanted, and he gave it to them. This popularity eventually led to Otto and Peter Willem taking over promoting for the major towns of Bremen and Graz, when they bought out Nico Selenkowitz upon retirement. Wanz and Willem would alter how events were running, but it was only slightly. They ran tours around Austria in the summer and Germany in the fall and winter. They would run the same venue for about a month featuring different cards and usually the same wrestlers. Otto would run the tours in some towns with Peter Willem running tours in other towns. Matches were held under the classic European rules with 4 to 5 minute rounds. Their early rosters, aside from Otto Wanz, featured other Central Europeans like the fantastic Mile Zerno, joint promotions regulars like Tony St. Clair, John Quinn, and Giant Haystacks, young vets like Fit Finlay, and US-based stars like the WWF's Andre the Giant, and a young AWA star named Baby Bull Leon White, better known to Otto's audience as Bull Power, and even better known as Vader. Bull Power would start with Otto in 1986, and after about a year in March of 1987, he did the seemingly impossible when he defeated Otto for the CWA Championship on an AWA show in Denver. This title change also appears to be when Otto started promoting under the Catch Wrestling Association name. The Bull Power Otto Wanz feud would continue on for a while, with both men going back and forth between the AWA and CWA. Another monster Otto would bring in around this time was Big Steel Man Fred Ottman. I know he's a bit of a joke now with Tugboat and Shockmaster, but Big Steel Man? No fucking joke. He only made one stop on his way to the WWF, but it's great. In 1990, Otto Wanz retired from in-ring action, but would continue on as the primary promoter for CWA. However, he would come out of retirement for several matches in 1991, 1994, and 1996. Typical wrestler retirement. The new decade would also bring in several new names from around the world, like Dave Taylor from the UK, Tom Pritchard, Larry Cameron, and Terry Funk from the US, and Rambo and Owen Hart from Canada. In December 1991, CWA would hold the inaugural Euro Catch Festival in front of 10,000 fans. The Catch Festivals would become the premier event for CWA, with them holding the event twice a year, once in July in Graz and again in December in Bremen. The show featured a card with Ken Patera, Vader vs. Tatsumi Fujinami, and Greg the Hammer Valentine. During this period, they also got into the pro-athlete music video genre. The trend started by NFL teams in 1985 eventually found its way to wrestling with the WWF's Land of a Thousand Dances and Pile Driver. The CWA roster released 2 songs as far as I can tell. The LA Rams had Ram It.
I'm a mountain man from West VA, they call me Herc and I came to play. I learned long ago to ram it just right, you can ram it all day and ram it all night. Ram it, do you know how to ram it? Just ram it. We know how to ram it, so we rockin' LA, so let's ram it today.
The CWA had Young, Strong, and Healthy. The Chicago Bears had the Super Bowl Shuffle.
Strutting our stuff for everyone. We're not here to start no trouble. We're just here to do the Super Bowl Shuffle.
And the CWA had my personal favorite, We Are Dynamite. Not sure how popular We Are Dynamite actually was, but the roster did lip-sync the song a couple of times on German talk shows. As bad as these songs may be, they're miles better than the AWA's Wrestle Rock Rumble.
I grind him up at the Wrestle Rock Rumble. Woo! Wrestle Rock.
In 1992, CWA forms a partnership with New Japan Pro Wrestling, giving their cards an even more international feel. Catch had always been a stop for New Japan talent on excursion outside of Japan, like Masahiro Chono in 1987 for example. But 1992 would start to see more established stars come to Bremen and Graz. Das Wunderkind Alex Wright gets a spot with the promotion, joining his father Steve Wright in CWA as well. Steve Wright, by the way, is super underrated in my opinion. Hell of a wrestler. 1992 would also introduce a new competitor to the CWA, when Gerd Vollink launched GWF, the German Wrestling Federation. The promotion proved to be no match for Otto and CWA and shut down in 1993. That year's Catch Festival shows featured interesting cards with Fujinami vs. Bob Orton Jr. and Rambo vs. Terry Funk for the CWA title in July, with 3,500 fans in attendance. And the December event had Giant Haystacks, The Warlord, Eddie Gilbert, Road Warrior Hawk, and finally William Steven Regal shows up. That show had 8,000 fans turning up. In 1993, CWA would welcome some more fresh faces to the roster, like Ulf Herman and Lance Storm. They also start to feature women's matches with Wendy Richter and Debbie Combs being brought in. By June 1993, the shows in Graz start to draw really well. The hot streak was attributed to stars like Hiroyoshi Yamamoto, Franz Schumann, Fit Finlay, and Lance Storm, who were all incredibly over. On December 13, 1993, tragedy would strike CWA when Larry Cameron suffers a heart attack mid-match against Tony St. Clair in Bremen, passing away at the age of 41. Cameron was one of many Americans that made a name for themselves in CWA. Otto Wanz would find himself in some controversy afterwards when he allegedly refused to pay the $3,000 to send Cameron's body home. It supposedly pissed off a lot of the other American talent. The The shows continued in Bremen right up to that December's Eurocatch Festival on December 18th. The show featured Alex Wright, Stan Hansen, Terry Funk, and Jushin Thunder Liger, with 5,000 fans in attendance. When CWA starts running again in the summer of 1994, they book a pretty interesting matchup when they bring in Cactus Jack to challenge Rambo for the CWA Championship. He'd come back for a rematch in October. Should probably mention this funny tidbit. Every American seems to have come out to Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA for entrances. Cactus Jack, Debbie Combs, Vader, doesn't matter.
Ladies Wrestling ist angesagt. Zum ersten Mal beim Weltcup-Turnier auf dem Schützenplatz im Catchpalast.
395 pounds of sheer power.
The Summer Catch Festival in Graz featured some former WWF names like Jim Duggan and Papa Shango. Also, Finlay tags with John Hawk, the future Bradshaw. Very cool. The December 1994 Catch Festival card included Finlay defending the CWA Intercontinental title against Steve Kern as Doink, Too Cold Scorpio taking on Tenzan, and Tony St. Clair taking on Masahiro Chono, with an attendance of 6,000 in Bremen. Now is probably a good time to talk about the differences of Otto Wanz and Peter Willem as promoters. Otto is considered extremely respected by those that worked for him, JBL and Vader being two names specifically. However, not everyone that worked for him felt the same way. Wanz was a big fan of larger wrestlers. He pushed 300-pounders really hard for, I think, obvious reasons. Having a preference for talent is fine, but the way he treated talents who didn't have that size led a lot of guys to feel unappreciated and disrespected. According to Lance Storm, Otto would bring in guys from all over the world and just kind of leave them there on their own until showtime. Talents from the US, UK, Canada, Japan just wandering around Austria trying to get a hotel or food. Otto also wasn't exactly transparent about stuff like pay. There were instances where Otto would make a deal with a talent like, say, Lance Storm, to be paid weekly, but ends up paying them only when they worked a show. They would be over there for sometimes up to 6 months, with about a week or 10 days off in between tournaments, and not being paid, while still being responsible for their own food and hotel. I'm sure there's a lot of guys who thought these stretches sucked. Otto may not have rubbed everyone the right way, but there were still a lot of guys that respected him and did enjoy working for him. Peter Willem, on the other hand, didn't have the same respect from a lot of the talents because he'd never been a wrestler like Otto. But some talents did find Williams easy to work with. He was much more approachable and easier to talk to than Otto. Peter Willem also valued match quality over size, so the smaller talents really enjoyed working for him, since they were given better spotlight on his cards. He's also responsible for the introduction of the CWA Junior Heavyweight title in 1993. Overall, he seems to have been more accommodating and respectful to all the talents, even if some didn't have the same respect for him. In 1995, CWA brings in former WWF stars Jim Neidhart and Rick Martel, along with current WWF star Kama, who was on his way out of the Federation at the time. Now, you've probably realized I haven't mentioned any sort of TV show that CWA had. Well, Catch never had their own television deal. Instead, they invested in producing high-quality VHS tapes and broadcast select matches on other wrestling programs, like the Welsh show Wrestlo. They even had host Oric Williams live at ringside for these matches.
Listen to me, I am the best wrestler, the toughest, the hardest. Just watch what I do with this WWF clown.
Wel, dyna y ymatebiad o'n heno, mae o'n erbyn dipyn o glown.
Even without TV, some of these matches we have from the VHS tapes really help showcase the atmosphere of CWA. The ref is blowing a whistle, there's horns going off, the fans are going nuts. It's incredibly overstimulating, but I want to be there.
But Vance says enough is enough. He wants to bring this to a quick end now. Urged on by his supporters.
In March 1995, the CWA partnership with New Japan had stars like Tony St. Clair and Rambo representing the promotion, and NJPW stars like Jushin Liger coming back to CWA. CWA held their Summer Catch Festival in July with a crowd of 3,000 to see Finlay defend the CWA Intercontinental title against Satoshi Kojima, and Tony St. Clair take on Yoshihiro Takayama in a shoot match fight. Aside from the catch festivals, CWA would also hold other yearly or twice-yearly events, like Champions Night, Final War, Iron Man, and Super Brawl. Most other events on the calendar featured the standard singles and tag matches with the occasional 2 out of 3 fall stipulation. These named shows had cage matches, Texas bull rope matches, street fights, chain matches, falls count anywhere, all that standard pro wrestling stuff. Catch would get a major debut in September of 1995 when the Ultimate Warrior does a shot for the promotion. And he made sure to bring along his usual Warrior baggage, canceling an interview with Germany's biggest newspaper to promote the show. As a result, the return of the Warrior event didn't sell out the same as similar shows had with other US names, like Too Cold Scorpio and Doink. Some big news comes out of the December Catch Festival when Ludwig Borga defeats Rambo for the CWA Heavyweight Championship. The show drew a crowd of around 5,000. Borga would retain the title at the 1996 Summer Festival in July, in front of 4,000 fans. The 1996 Winter Catch Festival only drew a crowd of about 2,500 for a card that featured the Bushwhackers, Finlay vs. Funk, and Rambo reclaiming the CWA Heavyweight Championship from Borga. But let's take a pause to look at some of the characters that passed through CWA. Klaus Koroff, a real character who was surprisingly innovative and occasionally wore this amazing cape. Colonel Brody, who's pretty similar to Colonel De Beers from the AWA in terms of look, but other times he's like a cross between M. Bison and Dr. Robotnik. I like it. Salvatore Bellomo ditches the clean-cut jobber look in favor of a wild Spartan gladiator-type gimmick. It's amazing, no notes. Rocky Las Vegas, who's just the Godfather in WWE 2K preset number 3 gear. Texas Scott, who is just Scott Hall. And look at the fucking size of him, a monster. Jason Neidhart, who's giving the goatee a shot, but thankfully he's not trying to be an exact copy. Sometimes he'd wear a little pink or the deep U singlet, but that's about it. Johnny South as British LOD, which is just ripping off Road Warrior Hawk specifically. Honorable mention to Franz Schumann in his If You Squint He's Bret Hart gear. In April 1997, CWA would develop another Japanese partnership when they send Rambo and Victor Kruger to tour with Battle Arts. The promotion's main event scene would take a hit after the Summer Catch Festival when Rambo vacates the CWA Heavyweight title and signs with the WWF where he would become Sniper of the Truth Commission. Thankfully, Catch had already added to their roster with Robbie Brookside, Rhino, and Jean-Pierre Lafitte all coming in at various times. In 1998, CWA would hold substantially less shows than years prior. They ran a handful of shows in the summer, really picking up in the fall and winter. That year's Catch Festival was a major disappointment, attracting only about 1,000 fans. Some interesting names on the card included Big Titan, Rhino, Tenzan, and Super Crazy. Rambo also returned to the company. 1999 would see even smaller crowds and even less shows as Catch only had 11 events. The promotion continued to try to freshen up the roster, bringing over Joe E. Legend and Kurgan. With less star power than years past, Catch Wrestling Association held their last show of the year. Their last Euro Catch Festival, their last show, period. I can't find an exact attendance number, but I think it's safe to assume less than 1,000. And that's the story of the Catch Wrestling Association. For over a decade, Otto Wanz and CWA carved out their own little spot in the wrestling world. They survived through all the ups and downs of the business. CWA presented some great wrestling with fun characters. Their schedule helped tons of talent hone their craft. Performing for the same crowds night in and night out forces you to change what you do. You can't have the same match that you had the night before. That type of schedule really helps ignite the creativity that great wrestling requires. Otto Wanz, regardless of his criticisms, knew good talent. Vader, Alex Wright, Chono, JBL, Lance Storm, William Regal, the list goes on and on. He had eyes on the future. Catch Wrestling Association truly was dynamite. I've linked 2 playlists of CWA matches in the description, so feel free to check those out. One of which is a massive archive posted by Sign Squad. And also let me know any thoughts you have about Catch Wrestling Association in the comments. You can also leave a suggestion for future DCW episodes. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by subscribing or finding me on social media, either here or here. I'm Scott from WrestleSpective. watch wrestling, love wrestling. Thanks for watching.